All right, let's talk about something that confuses a lot of folks. It's called Stockholm Syndrome. Now, what in the world is that? It's a real puzzle, a genuine psychological mystery. People hear about it and scratch their heads. They wonder how a victim, someone who's been terrified and threatened, could ever start to feel something positive for their captor. It just doesn't seem to make any sense, does it? It goes against everything we think we know about how people should react in dangerous situations. We're going to unpack this phenomenon today, piece by piece, so you can understand it better. Imagine for a moment you are in a terrible situation. You are trapped. You are scared out of your wits. Your very life is hanging by a thread, completely in someone else's hands. Then, over time, something starts to shift inside you. You begin to look at the person who is holding you, the person who is causing all this fear, in a different light. Now, this isn't some simple choice you make, like picking what to have for dinner. Oh no, it's a far more complicated emotional and psychological reaction to extreme stress and danger. It's a survival mechanism kicking in when you feel utterly powerless. Some people might hear about this and think it's about weakness. They might mistakenly believe it's about someone being foolish or not strong enough. Let me tell you right now, that is flat out wrong. Stockholm Syndrome is not a character flaw. It's a survival strategy, pure and simple. The human mind is an incredible thing. It will do some very strange and unexpected things to try and protect itself when it's under immense pressure. We have to approach this subject with compassion and a real desire to understand the deep psychological forces at work here. So let's get real about Stockholm Syndrome. We need to cut through the myths and the misunderstandings. We're going to look at exactly where this term came from, what specific event led to its creation. We will explore the psychological reasons why it happens to some people in these horrific circumstances. And most importantly, we will discuss how individuals who experience this can find a path to healing. This entire conversation is about gaining understanding and fostering empathy, not about passing judgment on anyone. Let's begin. This whole thing, this term Stockholm Syndrome, it all started in a specific place at a specific time. We have to go back to Stockholm, Sweden. The year was 1973, August to be exact. A man named Jan-Erik Olsson, an escaped convict, tried to rob a bank called Creditbanken at Norrmalmstorg Square, but the robbery didn't go as planned. Olsson ended up taking 4 bank employees hostage, 3 women and 1 man. This wasn't just a quick in-and-out robbery. No, this turned into a tense standoff that lasted for 6 long, grueling days with the world watching. Inside that bank vault, something truly unexpected began to unfold. The hostages, who were clearly in danger and terrified, started to develop a strange and confusing connection with Olsson. Now, make no mistake, he threatened their lives. He had them trapped. Yet he also performed small acts that they perceived as kindness. For instance, he gave one of the female hostages, Kristin Enmark, his jacket when she was shivering from the cold. He tried to comfort another hostage when she became distressed. These small gestures in the midst of terror started to warp their perceptions. When the police finally drilled a hole into the vault and tried to end the siege, the hostages reacted in a way that baffled everyone. They seemed to be more afraid of the police rescuers than they were of Olsson and his accomplice, Clark Olofsson, who had joined him. Kristin Enmark famously had a telephone call with the Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme. During that call, she expressed that she felt safe with her captors and was wary of the police. She even criticized the police's tactics, pleading for them to let the captors leave with the hostages. After the 6-day crisis ended and the hostages were freed, the term Stockholm Syndrome was officially born. It was a criminologist and psychiatrist, Neil Bergerot, who was advising the police during the siege, who coined it. He used this new term to describe the paradoxical psychological phenomenon where these hostages had developed positive feelings, even a sense of loyalty towards their captors. They seemed to side with their abusers against the authorities. This shocking event in Stockholm opened up a whole new chapter in our understanding of trauma and human survival instincts. So, the big question is, why does this happen? Why would anyone develop positive feelings for someone who is threatening their life? It seems to go against all logic. Well, let me tell you, it's primarily about survival. Your brain, in a desperate situation, is not always logical. It is trying to keep you alive. This is a primal instinct kicking in, a deep-seated response that bypasses rational thought. When you are completely powerless and dependent on your captor for your very existence, your mind can do extraordinary things to adapt and endure the unbearable. Think about it from the victim's perspective. The captor has absolute control. They control your food, your water, your ability to move, even whether you live or die. In such an extreme power imbalance, any small act of perceived kindness from the captor can feel monumental. A simple glass of water, a moment where they don't shout, or even a brief conversation can be magnified. The victim might start to cling to these tiny moments as a sign that the captor isn't all bad, as a spark of hope in an otherwise terrifying darkness. This dependence fosters a distorted view. Then there's a powerful psychological concept called cognitive dissonance. Your mind really doesn't like internal conflict or contradiction. If you're being treated terribly by someone, but that same person occasionally shows you a sliver of kindness, it creates a massive mental conflict. This person is my tormentor, but they just gave me a blanket. To reduce this uncomfortable dissonance, your mind might start to subtly change your feelings about the captor. It might start to emphasize the good and downplay the bad, making the overall situation feel less psychologically threatening. It's a way to cope. This kind of response isn't a conscious decision. It's not like someone wakes up and says, "I think I'll start liking my kidnapper today." No, it's a powerful, often unconscious psychological defense mechanism. The victim might begin to see the world from the captor's point of view, to understand their motivations, or even to sympathize with them, perhaps seeing them as a victim of circumstances too. This distorted empathy becomes a twisted pathway to feeling a little bit safer, a little more in control, in a situation where they have no real control at all. The Norrmalmstorg Robbery was the event that gave this syndrome its name, but it certainly wasn't the first or last time this kind of perplexing bond has been observed. We have seen similar patterns emerge in various other incredibly tough and traumatic situations throughout history. For example, consider prisoners of war. There are documented instances where POWs have developed surprisingly positive feelings, or at least a sense of understanding, for their guards, even after experiencing harsh treatment. It seems to be a shared human experience that can manifest under conditions of extreme, prolonged stress and powerlessness. We also see dynamics that echo Stockholm syndrome in cases of long-term domestic abuse. Now, this is a very sensitive area, but it's important to discuss. An individual might be in a relationship with a partner who is controlling, manipulative, and violent, yet the victim might find themselves defending the abuser to outsiders. They might make excuses for the abuser's horrific behavior. They might feel an incredibly strong, albeit unhealthy bond that makes it seem impossible to leave. This toxic attachment is powerful, insidious, and incredibly dangerous, forming a psychological trap. Then, of course, there's the widely publicized case of Patty Hearst. She was a young, wealthy newspaper heiress who was kidnapped from her apartment in Berkeley, California, back in 1974. She was taken by a radical political group called the Symbionese Liberation Army, SLA. After being held captive, subjected to horrendous abuse and indoctrination for weeks, she seemingly transformed. She later appeared to have joined her captors, even participating in a bank robbery with them. The public was absolutely shocked and divided. Was this a genuine case of Stockholm syndrome, or was she a willing participant? These cases, and others like the heartbreaking story of Natasha Kampusch in Austria, who was kidnapped as a child and held for 8 years, reveal a disturbing pattern. Certain elements seem to be consistently present when this syndrome develops. Prolonged isolation from the outside world is a key factor. The constant threat of violence or death is another. And critically, any small act of perceived kindness or leniency from the captor can significantly amplify the potential for this traumatic bonding to occur. These elements combine to create a perfect storm for Stockholm syndrome to take root in the victim's psyche. A deeper dive, the Patty Hearst saga. Let's dig a little deeper into the Patty Hearst story, because it really catapulted the concept of Stockholm syndrome into the mainstream public consciousness. When Patricia Hearst was 19 years old, she was violently abducted by the Symbionese Liberation Army. This wasn't some well-established revolutionary force. They were a small, erratic, and extremely violent group with a bizarre ideology. After her kidnapping, she was kept locked in a tiny closet for weeks on end. Can you even begin to imagine the sheer terror? The isolation, the complete loss of control she must have experienced during that time after enduring this intense period of captivity, physical abuse, sexual assault and relentless political indoctrination. Patty Hearst's outward behavior underwent a dramatic and shocking transformation. She publicly renounced her wealthy family and her former life. She adopted a new name, Tanya, after one of Che Guevara's comrades. Then, most astonishingly, she was photographed wielding an assault rifle while participating in a bank robbery with members of the SLA. The public was utterly confounded. Was she a brainwashed victim forced into these actions, or had she become a willing revolutionary criminal? During her subsequent trial, her defense lawyers, led by the famous F. Lee Bailey, argued passionately that she was a classic victim of Stockholm Syndrome. They contended that she had been thoroughly brainwashed and psychologically coerced. They argued that her actions were not her own, but were committed out of an overwhelming fear for her life and a desperate, instinctual need to survive her horrific ordeal. The prosecution, however, painted a different picture. They argued that she'd joined the SLA willingly and was responsible for her criminal actions. It became one of the most controversial and debated trials of the decade. Patty Hearst's case is incredibly complex, and it remains a subject of discussion even today. It starkly highlights how blurred the lines can become between victim and perpetrator in the eyes of the public and even the law under such extreme circumstances. Her story underscores the immense psychological pressure and manipulation a captive can endure. She was ultimately convicted of bank robbery and sentenced to prison. However, her sentence was later commuted by President Carter, and she eventually received a full pardon from President Clinton. Many now view her primarily as a victim who endured an unimaginable trauma, and her story serves as a stark lesson about its profound impact. The lingering shadow, long-term effects on survivors. Getting free from the captor, escaping the immediate physical danger, is a monumental step. But let me be clear, the nightmare often doesn't just end when the captivity does. Stockholm Syndrome and the traumatic experience that causes it can leave deep, lasting emotional and psychological scars. Survivors frequently struggle for many years, sometimes even for the rest of their lives, to cope with the aftermath. Healing is not a quick fix. It's a long, arduous journey that requires immense courage, time, and dedicated support from those around them. Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD as it's commonly known, is very prevalent among survivors of such ordeals. They might find themselves reliving the traumatic events through intrusive flashbacks during the day. They might be haunted by terrifying nightmares when they try to sleep. Everyday occurrences like loud noises, sudden movements, or even certain smells or locations can act as triggers, plunging them back into a state of intense fear and anxiety. Simple daily life, things most people take for granted, can become an ongoing battle to maintain composure and a sense of safety. Learning to trust other people again can be an incredibly difficult hurdle for survivors. If you've experienced a situation where you formed a bond, however distorted, with your abuser, it can shake your faith in your own judgment of character. How do you know who to trust when your survival instincts led you to connect with someone who harmed you? This profound distrust can extend to friends, family, and new acquaintances. As a result, relationships can suffer immensely, and survivors might feel profoundly isolated, alone, and deeply misunderstood by a world that hasn't experienced what they have. This makes social reintegration a very challenging process. Furthermore, some survivors might grapple with overwhelming feelings of guilt or shame. They might irrationally blame themselves for developing those confusing positive feelings towards their captor. They might torture themselves with what-ifs, wondering if they could have or should have acted differently during their captivity. It is absolutely crucial for them and for us to remember that Stockholm Syndrome is a trauma response. It is an involuntary coping mechanism. It is not their fault. They were victims of horrific circumstances, and they deserve understanding, validation, and unwavering support, not blame. Building defenses, prevention, and early intervention. Now, you might be asking, can we actually prevent Stockholm Syndrome from happening? Well, in some specific types of situations, particularly acute hostage crises, the answer is yes, potentially. Rapid and effective response by law enforcement and crisis negotiators is absolutely key. Generally speaking, the shorter the duration of the captivity, the less time there is for that intense paradoxical bond between captor and captive to form and solidify. Quick, decisive and well-planned action by authorities can genuinely make a life-saving difference and reduce psychological harm. Training for law enforcement personnel, first responders, and especially crisis negotiators is also incredibly crucial. These professionals need to have a thorough understanding of the complex psychology involved in hostage situations, including the dynamics that can lead to Stockholm Syndrome. They need to be skilled in how to communicate effectively with captors, how to de-escalate volatile situations, and importantly, how to interact with and support victims both during the crisis and in its immediate aftermath. Knowledge and specialized skills are powerful tools in mitigating harm in these high-stakes scenarios. For victims who are experiencing ongoing abuse, such as in situations of domestic violence or long-term kidnapping, public awareness and community vigilance are vital components of prevention. Friends, family members, colleagues, and the wider community need to be educated to recognize the subtle and overt signs of abuse and coercive control. We must work to create and promote safe, accessible pathways for victims to seek help without fear of judgment or retribution. Breaking the cycle of isolation that abusers often impose on their victims is so critically important. It can be a true lifeline. Beyond these broader prevention strategies, early psychological support is absolutely critical for anyone who has endured a period of captivity or extreme coercive control. This is true even if they don't immediately show obvious signs that fit the classic description of Stockholm Syndrome. Trauma affects every individual differently, and the absence of one specific symptom doesn't mean there isn't significant psychological distress. Getting professional mental health help as early as possible can play a significant role in preventing the development of more severe, long-term problems like chronic PTSD or deep-seated trust issues. It's about providing immediate, compassionate care. The path to healing. Treatment and support. Treating Stockholm Syndrome at its core means treating the underlying trauma. There isn't some magic pill or a quick fix that can make it all go away overnight. Healing is a process, and it almost always requires professional therapy. It demands a great deal of patience, both from the survivor and from their support network. Survivors need a safe, non-judgmental space where they can talk about their experiences, explore their conflicting emotions, and begin to process the terrifying and confusing events that happened to them. This validation is a cornerstone of recovery. One therapeutic approach that has shown to be very helpful for trauma survivors is cognitive behavioral therapy, often referred to as CBT. This type of therapy helps individuals understand the intricate connections between their thoughts, their feelings, and their behaviors. It works to help them identify and challenge negative or distorted thought patterns that may have developed as a result of the trauma. CBT equips survivors with practical coping strategies and tools to manage symptoms of PTSD, anxiety, and depression. It empowers them to gradually reclaim their lives and their sense of self from the shadow of their past. Support groups can also play an immensely valuable role in the healing journey. There is a unique power in connecting with other people who have been through similar nightmarish experiences. It helps to significantly reduce those overwhelming feelings of isolation and a sense that no one else could possibly understand. Sharing stories, struggles, and triumphs within a supportive group setting can be incredibly validating and healing. It helps survivors realize they are not alone in their pain or their recovery process, fostering a sense of community and shared strength, which is vital for moving forward. Rebuilding trust, both in oneself and in others, is often a slow and delicate process for survivors. Family members and friends need to exercise extraordinary patience and understanding. It's crucial not to judge the survivor's feelings or their pace of recovery. Avoid pressuring them to get over it or to behave in ways they aren't ready for. Simply being there, offering consistent, unwavering, loving support is one of the most powerful healers available. This consistent, non-judgmental presence helps survivors to gradually feel safe again in the world and in their relationships. Beyond the label compassion and informed support, Stockholm Syndrome is so much more than just a catchy headline or a plot device in a movie. It represents a real, profoundly painful and deeply confusing experience for the individuals who live through it. As a society, we absolutely need to approach this topic and the survivors themselves with a deep well of compassion. We need to try, as best we can, to put ourselves in their shoes, to imagine even for a moment the sheer terror, the helplessness, and the psychological torment they faced. This empathy is the starting point for any meaningful support. Understanding the why behind Stockholm Syndrome helps us to support survivors more effectively and with greater sensitivity. It is not about assigning blame or questioning their character. It's about recognizing this phenomenon for what it is: a desperate survival instinct kicking in when the human mind is pushed to its absolute limit. The mind is an incredibly complex and adaptive organ. It will do what it perceives it needs to do to help the individual endure circumstances that feel utterly unbearable. This fundamental truth needs to be acknowledged and respected by all of us. Education is absolutely key in fostering a supportive environment for survivors. The more people understand about trauma, its varied effects on the human psyche, and the specific dynamics of situations that can lead to Stockholm Syndrome, the better. Myths, misinformation, and judgmental attitudes can cause additional harm to survivors who are already struggling. Informed support, on the other hand, can make a monumental difference in their long and difficult recovery journey. Let's make a collective effort to spread accurate knowledge and understanding, not stigma and uninformed opinions. Ultimately, this entire discussion is about helping people heal from unspeakable experiences. It's about validating their trauma and their often confusing responses to it. It's about ensuring they have access to the resources, the professional help, and the compassionate community support they need to rebuild their lives. Every single survivor of such an ordeal deserves the chance to find peace, to reclaim their sense of self, and to move forward with hope. Let's all choose to be part of that solution. Let's choose empathy, understanding, and unwavering support.